Good afternoon. So I'm interested in how we're going to protect those tigers in India, how we're going to allocate water from the Nile, and how we're going to leave fossil fuels in the ground. And these are all large-scale cooperation dilemmas, and I got interested then in cooperation as a phenomenon, the tension between the individual and the group and between groups with different interests. And what you soon realize when studying cooperation is that punishment is a very clear tool for enhancing and promoting cooperation. And it's not very technological, but it is very, very sophisticated punishment. So then I got a little more interested in punishment, and in particular I got interested in the evolution of punishment. And when we are looking at the evolution, it's always fun to look at just our closest living relative, the chimpanzee, to compare ways in which we are similar and ways in which we're different in terms of punishment. So I wanted to walk you through some of these and then highlight shame as a real, not just an emotion, but as a tool that we can use perhaps, and I think that a tool that will become more and more important into the future. So one way in which we're similar is that both chimpanzees and humans have second-party punishment. That's just the phenomenon if A transgresses against B, if you attack me, I might retaliate against you and punish you. So A transgresses against B, B punishes A. Pretty simple, sort of basic reciprocity in terms of punishment. Another way in which we're similar is that we share some forms of punishment. So if you think about punishment as a deprivation, both humans and chimpanzees can use as punishment depriving another individual of life, of physical safety, so biting them, breaking their arm, putting them in their place in some physical way. Or we can deny or deprive another individual of resources. In the case of chimpanzees, it might be fruit or access to territory. And of course, in the case of humans, we have all sorts of different resources, including monetary resources now. So these are fundamental ways in which humans behave very similarly to chimpanzees culturally in terms of punishment. But if we just think about the ways in which humans then are different, I think this is illuminating for understanding how punishment has gotten more sophisticated in human societies and more intense in certain ways. So one of those is, and I'd say it's the cheapest form of punishment, it's the most ideal form if you as a society can really foster and encourage this kind of punishment, is self-punishment. And it's a very strange, very, very complicated thing in which A transgresses against A and A punishes A. This is guilt, an emotion, a tool that we sometimes use on ourselves to self-regulate. And so the issue with guilt is simply between you and your conscience. How will this make me feel in the future? Am I living up to my own personal standards, my own internal standards? The other way in which we're different, which is also very interesting, is third-party punishment. So that would mean that A transgresses against B, and C, who is unaffected by the transgression, punishes A. So in chimpanzees, they have done these studies where they tried to get even dominant chimpanzees to punish a transgressor who stole even an individual related to the dominant's food. So this would be the kind of ideal situation for third-party punishment in chimpanzees, and it didn't happen. Chimpanzees are not third-party punishers, but humans are very, very strong third-party punishers. We see this in the laboratory, and we also see the rise then of this thing called common pool punishment, or the state, where we allow the state to punish on our behalf. And that's part of course, the state's duty. So this is, again, one way in which our societies are fundamentally different than chimpanzee societies. Another form of punishment that rose along with the state, actually, was another form of deprivation of liberty, the rise of prisons. And so this is something, again, linked to the state where we are willing to cordon off certain individuals from society. So you could say this is a form of resource deprivation, but it's a very unique form that humans haven't had for very long. Instead, the other unique form of deprivation that humans have had for much longer, but still distinguishes us quite a bit from chimpanzees, is shame. So the act of exposing a certain individual or groups of individuals to the group as transgressors, both the threat of shame and actual shame. And there are a few things to say about shame as a tool. One is that it was greatly facilitated by language. And this is, of course, another way in which we're distinct. And language and gossip and negative gossip about others in the group was the earliest form of shame. Of course, shame is changing quite a bit with every new technology, including the internet, so that today there's potentially 2.7 billion people online at any moment. And this is a potential audience for any transgression. So this is a way in which shame has changed a lot in society. And shame can be used by the weak against the strong in a way that some of these other deprivations are much more difficult to do. So this is, I would argue, a very unique and important aspect of human society. The other thing that we need to consider now with globalization, with the rise of the states, with the rise of groups, the rise of the corporation, is how punishment then manifests itself at that level. How does it work against groups? And what you have to realize is that as a group itself, so if we want to punish, let's say, ExxonMobil, we can't kill it, per se, as its body. We can't break its bone. We can't put Exxon in jail. Instead, one of our options is to deprive ExxonMobil of resources in some way, so through fines or taxation. And the other option, of course, is to shame ExxonMobil and deny it of some aspect of its reputation. So at the group level, we had those 5 different categories of deprivations available to individuals, and we have 2 that are available when we talk about punishing groups. So this also, I think, makes shame and social exposure, the idea of exposing a transgressor to the audience, much more important in today's society than ever before. Maybe with the exception of when we were sort of very early on in human evolution. In some cases, we can't even deny groups of resources. In some cases, we really don't have any of these options. And an example I'd like to bring up is in the case of the banker bonuses in the United States. And in that case, Obama was unable to, and Congress, when they made the call, they did not decide the way in which the bonuses were to be spent, and there was no fining the banks for how they spent them. So when they used the bonuses to pay, when they used the bailout money, to pay bonuses, Obama called them shameful, in part because there was really no other option for punishment than to glom onto the reputational angle. And so this, to me, when there's an absence of other forms of punishment, more formal or of any of those other forms I mentioned, again, shame becomes one of our clearest options. And I would argue that is why Obama is going to go after the name and shame method at the COP21 meetings in Paris next year on climate change. So at the end of next year, all the countries are meeting. The hope is to come to a binding international treaty to reduce CO2 emissions. And Obama is going after the name and shame accord rather than a binding treaty because he's worried that Congress will never ratify a binding treaty. And so basically you have these 2 options again at the group level. You can deprive countries, in this case, of resources somehow through some binding treaty, although it's not very clear how that would really work in terms of taxation or fines or anything like that. Or you can deny the country of the reputational aspects. So in this really globalized international arena, one of arguably the largest cooperation dilemmas on the planet, climate change, we see the emergence now of a shaming policy potentially at the end of next year. And I would argue this again is just a sign that these reputational aspects of punishment and in society in general are becoming increasingly important. And that's kind of what my main thesis is about, is that you can use shame, weak against strong, at the group level. It can scale, and it can be much more actually efficient than some other forms of punishment, including self-punishment. Thank you.
I'm just curious about the day-to-day life of a research scientist. How do you go about devising experiments to try and understand human motivation better? What do you do on a Monday morning? Do you go to a lab?
I do. I go to a lab, and we have to, unfortunately, when we design these experiments, it's been very difficult for us to envision ones that operate at the group level. So a lot of our experiments are on individuals, and then we have to sort of just look at behavior of countries, of groups in response to reputation. But I think the next step is moving the sort of small-scale cooperation experiments, scaling them up so that it's on hundreds of people that operate in groups at the same time rather than just on individual psychology.
And you're interested in lots of aspects of the human mind. What's your next big project?
I'm interested in, maybe I shouldn't say too much. No, I'm interested
I'm a journalist.
Yeah. I'm interested in self-restraint, but a very specific form.
Well, look, thanks for joining us, and best of luck with the book. Thank you.